Thank you, Mr. Ghosh, and I'm really thankful to the moderator for making it easier for me, because as I came into the conference, I was going to talk about IP policy and strategy, and then I realized that I'm in a technical session. So I'm a pure copyright and trademark lawyer, nothing to do with patents. And I said to Mr. Ghosh, I'm going to be non-technical. And I think he did a great job of pulling the argument, pulling the discussion into policy space for me. Thank you for that. And I think it really brings us all to the same point where, yes, in different jurisdictions, we are all facing the same stumbling blocks as far as patents and software, specifically in the IT sector, is concerned. And really, we need to look at a policy change. So I'm going to concentrate on IP policy and how it is a cornerstone for India's economic growth, so sort of bringing it from the US back to India, where we are. And I'm going to break my presentation into three main parts. One is how IP is important for the economic growth of India, and then how Microsoft looks at IP and innovation, and then how the government can play a really great role in it, and that's where the policy piece comes in. Right. So we have been seeing a shift to the knowledge economy. We've had the WIPO and the ICC reports talking about how there is a role reversal of assets. As you can look at the slide, you can clearly see that by the year 2010, 80% is intangible assets of companies. So I'm not going to go into a long rhetoric discussion on that. We are all in this room probably ones who either value IP or are actually creating IP. And the transformation has really taken place in Asia. We can see that in the Asian context, the economies are moving from agriculture-based economies, manufacturing, to services, where there is a whole consumer base which is either consuming services or working in those sectors. There's a large pool of talented, educated scientists, engineers who are creating IP every day, and of course, India being a hub of entrepreneurs, I think, and startups. So there is a shift in demand within India also in IP rights. And again, the figures really talk about it, how the patent filing trends have changed, and Japan, Korea are really moving towards the offices where patents are being filed, apart from the US, which has been the traditional jurisdiction where patents have been filed. In fact, the JPO office received around 342,000 roughly applications in the year 2011 itself. So you can see the whole scene is changing towards Asia. Moving on to Microsoft's approach, there is this letter in the middle that you can see, which was written by Bill Gates long back in the year 1976, when Microsoft was a very small software company. And just to quote from that letter, he was talking about how computer hobbyists can actually be the ones who do the creative efforts and should come out with their creative efforts and get this whole thing going. So the R&D was something that Bill Gates was really looking forward to. And today, Microsoft spends around $10.4 billion on R&D. So, in Microsoft, the whole culture of IP is so strong in terms of the investment levels, the acumen, and the fact that we value IP. And I think it won't be wrong to say that Microsoft won't exist without its IP. So that's how important it is to us. Some figures there for you in terms of how many patent applications, 38,000 pending patent applications. So that's really, really humongous in terms of what we are waiting for. So we all have the same pain points as far as filings are concerned. And as Microsoft moves from a traditional software company to devices and services, we are really looking at more and more focus on IP, and that too more on the hardware side as well. Especially if you look at the Nokia transaction, which is now more or less in open domain, Nokia's patent portfolio is one of the most valuable in the technology sector. And really, we, as a result of the transaction, have made such a cost-effective patents arrangement in the services sectors, in the smart devices sector, that IP is going to be more than important, I guess, in the near future. Now, at the same time, if you look at India, India has something known as the SMEs, which is really a big chunk of the industry. And if you look at the government itself, it really has these statistics which talks about 12.8 million units employing around 31 million people. Now, that is a 38% of the industrial production, 33% of exports of India. And that's really where Microsoft wants to work with to enable them to increase their potential and work with the government in terms of how we can enable them to be more aware of their IP, because there's very little awareness on the IP side, how they can be trained and handheld in some areas through IP facilitation centers and advisors to monetize their IP as much as they can. Now, some of the works that we have done, and some of you may be aware of the Accelerator Center that we have in Bangalore, and we have some of these very innovative centers all over the world where we're working with entrepreneurs and startups to enable them to grow in the sector. And more recently, we had commissioned a report which really brought out in 5 countries how SMEs were really enabled by picking up technologies to make them cost-effective, efficient, and leaders in their own way. So if you look at the BCG report, which is linked up in this presentation when you get it, you can go straight to the report. This really looked at how in countries, US, Germany, China, India, and Brazil, how some of the SMEs which had picked up, and that doesn't mean technology as in only softwares, we're talking about technological innovations, and how those technological innovations helped them become market leaders very quickly. And the sort of findings, which are really amazing in terms of the amount of growth that it can forecast, if you look at it, the potential SME revenue can grow by 770 billion in just 5 countries, and around 6.2 million new jobs. So really the story for India is to have its SME go into the sector, work with the IP, and actually increase its potential through IP. This is just a slide which really talks about how Microsoft is working in India in terms of how it's adding value to the economy of India. And if you look at it, for every 1 rupee that Microsoft earned in 2012, these are 2012 figures, its partner network made around 9.7 INR. And 18,000 local companies in India who are partners employ around 3,82,000 people. Moving on to 1,41,000 IT professionals who use either Microsoft software or related products in terms of growing into a 38% of IT-related employment. So we at Microsoft really believe in the Indian economy and believe that we can make a very good contribution to that. Finally, we've been working a lot with the Business Software Alliance, where we are all members from the IT sector. We've had situations where we talk to government and really have gone with the points that really it's important for IPR to be not only benefiting the bigger companies, but as we said, SMEs and the smaller businesses. And here the important thing is we can talk about all about patents or trademark registrations, but at the end of the day, it is a reality in India that the enforcements really need to back up the protection, because the protection is meaningless if it's not enforced. So that's really an important policy issue in India, which we have as an industry sector also been talking about. We've been talking about technicality. So, this whole idea of negativity towards software per se, we've had this discussion about the CRI guidelines. We've all been there in that room, and it's really good when the CG office had that stakeholder consultation. I think it was one of the first exercise where the government itself came forward and said, let's hear the industry. And that's really a good step forward. So we are looking more and more towards a non-discriminatory approach in IP laws, and we hope that things will move in that direction. And of course, we all know the National IP Policy Plan and how it started off as a good step. Let's start thinking about a strategy. Let's start thinking about something at the national level. However, as we all know, we're still waiting for it, and we're looking to have that finalized. I'm not going to talk about these because we've been talking about it for the past 2-3 days, but it's some of the pain points that we've been facing. To end, really, we believe, and I think it's a bright future for India. We are looking at innovation, intellectual property, really bringing the sea change in technology, and looking to have a bright India with a developed technology base. Thank you.